To Expansive and Unscripted. My name is Jennifer. My pronouns are she and they. And I'm excited to be here with Laura Vann LaRusso today, who we're just going to explore conversation around intersectional identities and just the experience of being a complex and dynamic human being, which I often think for so many of us, we are often reduced to kind of like two-dimensional characters when there's so much more to us. So a little bit about Laura before we get started. She is an English communications skills coach for multilingual professionals, which I think is amazing because I mean we don't talk enough about that. So many people in business are doing business globally and navigating this communicating across various languages. So welcome, Laura. I'll give you a chance to if you want to say anything more about the work that you do before we get into our conversation.
Oh, I'd love to. And thank you so much, Jennifer. This is a wonderful opportunity to meet with you and to share with your audience. I'm really honored. Uh, well, the short version of what I do and why I do it is I'm a communication skills coach for multilingual professionals, yes, but what does that really look like? That means that I provide individual targeted strategic plans created just for my professionals who speak English as a second language. And they basically want to improve their presence in any room that they go into. They want to increase their courage when they speak English, and they want to speak with authority and no hesitation. And I try to help in providing them that one-on-one coaching experience based on whatever their big dreams and goals are. And I love my work. So that's what the short version. Oh, that's a
Amazing.
little part of me.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. And it's wonderful to do work that you love doing and that you're passionate about. So one of the things that we've talked about before in previous conversations is really what it is to be a person who is disabled and also professional and also an entrepreneur and also so many other intersections of identity that we have. And I
Mhm.
really appreciate this thread of conversation because I think it's something that many people struggle with, that they're seen only as one thing. If there are folks who are advocating for certain things, they're only seen as, oh, you're an advocate for this, versus the whole human being. And so much of the work that I do, that we do, is really about can we work on seeing people as the whole dynamic, complex version of
Mhm.
who they are. So, tell me a little bit about your experiences a person who holds multiple identities simultaneously.
Yes, it's an excellent topic of conversation, one of my favorites, because as a professional with a disability, certainly we have, and with disabilities, because there's a lot of us out here, we have a certain perspective that brings certain strengths to what we do, but it also brings certain frustrations. And for me, it has been a journey about, first of all, accepting my own physical disability. I have cerebral palsy, which is a neurological disability. It's considered a developmental in nature because it occurred before the age of 5. So, in that case, how it impacts me and how it has impacted me is that I walk with a pretty severe limp. And when I was younger, of course, like all of us, we were all 25 and 24 and 16. We were younger, and I moved a lot. more easily. And so I had even less of a limp. So this sort of basically encouraged me to live in sort of a land of denial. I would push my disability away and I would not acknowledge it. But over the years and through lots of personal growth and personal reflection, and also through my work as a New York State advocate for disability justice prior to becoming a communication skills coach, because that's like we all have all these different layers, right? I met some really top-notch advocates who set me straight and also helped me to embrace myself and embrace my disability as part of my strengths, because it gives us that certain sensitivity and awareness about implicit bias. And it also can propel us to and motivate us to give our clients and our community, the disability community, the skills they need to articulate who they are and why they matter.
Yeah.
So that's basically how the journey started. I went from denial to acceptance to empowering others. And I appreciate all of it.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think, um, I mean, in my own journey of coming to understand my brain and my body, it's been a process to unlearn some of those kind of ways that we are conditioned by our society to be ableist, to think in ableist ways, even against our own selves. And that is such important work for, I think, everyone to do, not just folks with, not just disabled folks. Um, there are some things that I see that, like, if you're not currently disabled, you're just pre-disabled. Like, it will happen at some point. If if nothing else, like, aging disables us, right? We begin to have limited abilities just because, our our bodies are limited and they age and can't do things like they used to. um and so I just appreciate the thoughtfulness that you've shared about that journey to kind of see, like, oh, this isn't something I should try to hide, or um I'm kind of working against myself if I'm just trying to push through, and I'm not going to let this hold me back. I think there's a lot of mixed messaging around disability, um,
Mhm.
everywhere. So everywhere in
Definitely.
society, right? There can be a lot of pressure, um, to don't let this hold you back. Don't let this, don't let your disability, or don't let your whatever it is, illness, hold you back
Mhm.
from
Mhm.
being the best everything. But then that essentially denies the reality of, but this this thing is disabling, or
Right.
because of the inaccessibility of society, this environment is disabling, or this system is debilitating, right? Like, I would operate differently if I was not required to, as a neurodivergent person, if I was not required to perform so much neuronormativity, right?
Right.
Sometimes it's the environment that disables us, and
Mhm.
sometimes it is the demands and expectations of others. How have you experienced that and navigated that?
Oh, you've got me thinking about so many. This, my brain is just popping off with all these sparks that I want to share with you. So, how I've experienced it is, I'm thinking about these three key words. Okay, first of all, um, accessibility, and then the other word is inclusion, and the final phrase would be implicit bias. So, in terms of accessibility, accessibility is actually, it can be a universal, beneficially, universally positive experience for everybody. regardless of disability. And I know that the community, the disability justice community, we've been pushing that for years. That's number one. So if we can get people to understand that when you're creating ramps into buildings, it can also help mothers with strollers. If you're aware of how lighting might affect someone who has seizure disorders, you might be a little more sensitive about that. If you are providing documentation during your staff meetings that are in various formats, large print, different languages, that's also about accessibility. And inclusion, my experience with inclusion, well, personally, if I'm going to be really honest with you, it's sort of, I had to sort of insist on my inclusion. I had to insist on it. And we talked about this. There was a hesitation, sometimes even now, as a communication skills coach for multilingual professionals. Sometimes I don't necessarily share that I have a disability. And then it's like, then I start feeling like, oh my God, am I faking it again? Am I denying myself again? No, it's because of that bias and the unintentional bias that people, it changes their focus sometimes, not for all people, but for many. They don't see you as this other thing. They don't see you as disabled or a person with a disability who is a doctor, a person with a disability, who is a social worker, who is a mother, who is a great theatrical performer, coach, teacher, whatever. So my experience has been that I've had to insist on my inclusion, and I've had to learn how to walk into any room with my head held high, and I've had to learn to not be reactive. And that's hard. I still work on it, even though I've had years of experience with it. Even I have to sometimes say, they don't mean those comments. They don't, they're not aware. I'm here to educate. I'm here to inform. And so I try to pass those strategies on to my clients, to my friends, and to the people that matter in the communities I serve.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you said about, wanting to be in spaces where you're not reduced to just one aspect of your identity. And I think that's something that, I mean, any of the disability advocates that I've ever listened to talk about that. It's something in the neurodivergent community, many people are exploring, like, do I out myself as neurodivergent at work? Do I out myself as autistic or ADHD or OCD? Because if people have been like experiencing my competence, there is something that happens. Even though our behavior doesn't necessarily change, there's something that shifts in other people. It's the stereotypes, it's
Right.
the, just kind of bias, the stigma of society. There's something that shifts when somebody hears someone is disabled in whatever way, neurologically, physically, learning differences. And so many folks that I talk to and that I coach, that I work with, are afraid of no longer being trusted to be competent in their professional roles if they disclose, their neurodivergence, even though they've been in that role performing fine. But
Right.
it's something that, I think this comes with the ableism of assuming, it's kind of this like all or nothing way of looking at things. Like, there's this assumption that if there is a disability, like there is no functioning at all across the board. There's
Mm-hmm.
in our society, there's a lack of understanding about the nuance and the dynamicness of disability in
Mhm.
that it doesn't show up the same every time. It doesn't. Our energy fluctuates. Our capacity to be present mentally and physically fluctuates. And one thing I've heard a lot of people talk about is like, well, you didn't need that support last week. Why do you need it now? Or,
Mhm.
like people, I
The judges in the room. The judges in the room are,
yes,
looking at you, looking at all of us. Hmm.
yes. And then I want to go back to another thing that you said about how when we design for accessibility, those things benefit everyone, right? Like, one of the most used examples is the curb cut when we get
Right.
to like the end of a block, right? There's a slope so that wheeled vehicles can navigate that, right? Like
Hmm.
that's an accessibility feature so
Hmm.
that people who use wheelchairs and walkers and other mobility aids are able to navigate streets. But like you said, delivery people who are hauling stuff on a hand truck,
Right.
people who are, moving their belongings on a dolly or a shopping cart or navigating with kiddos, all of those scenarios benefit from that curb cut. And yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, go ahead.
No, no, sorry to interrupt, but it really resonates with me. This whole idea, this accessibility idea, I want to always remind people about the universal connections. Like, first of all, we all have bad days. So, whether you have a disability or not, if you're a human being, you are going to have a bad day. The only difference between those of us that have disabilities and those of us that do not think that we do. Should I put it that way? I don't know. Or maybe we don't consider that we do. Um, is that our bad days maybe are a whole other level of experience? Like, I can't get out of bed today because my arthritis is killing me.
Mhm.
Or I can't focus today because I'm just way too distracted. I didn't get enough sleep. I didn't take whatever medications I need to take to keep myself stabilized. I didn't eat properly. I got into an argument with somebody. You know, this affects my body, my focus, my concentration, my coordination. But that bad day can be experienced across the board. It's the universal experience of being human. And if we would, and I guess this is just Laura speak, I'm sorry I'm so passionate about it, but if we would just stop, or at least try to stop, putting people into boxes
Mhm.
and just taking a moment to have a conversation with another human being. It sounds very Pollyanna, but really we would learn, right, from each
Mhm.
other. So,
Absolutely. I am a broken record when it comes to this. I'm constantly saying this phrase, lead with curiosity. That, like, if we all collectively practiced active curiosity, that would go such a long way in the relationships that we're navigating, and people feeling a sense of actually being known, actually belonging, because it's then everything is not based on assumptions of
right.
what a person is capable of or not. I hear often from folks who maybe have a mobility aid if they're in the shops.
Hmm.
Somebody just assumes that they need help reaching something without ever asking the person, is there anything I can assist you with? They just do the thing where the human being doesn't have the opportunity to consent or not consent to, like, I'm just sitting here thinking about what I need to do. I don't need assistance in this moment. Like, trust me to know what I need and ask me what I need rather
Right.
than assuming what is needed for me. Um
Yep.
And I think that's another element of, like you you said, it's something you're so passionate about. Um, but it's also something I think that can be exhausting, right? To kind
Yes.
of feel like we're constantly in a position of having to educate the people around us about, disability justice issues, about accessibility. How do you um, how do you kind of set boundaries with that and protect yourself in certain spaces around, like, what, I'm not being compensated for this education that I'm being provided?
Mhm.
What has been your journey into, like, yeah, navigating setting boundaries in certain situations versus others?
Well, before I became a communication skills coach, right? I mean, I got my master's in ESL at like 46. And so I'm definitely the definition of a late bloomer. And a lot of that was because I had absorbed a lot of the judgment and also developed major insecurities at that time, not at 46, but let's say in my 20s and 30s, about what I was entitled to do. Like, could I, as a person with a disability, have a family? Could I travel? Could I learn to speak another language? Could I get a master's? Whatever it was. And I had all that insecurity. And so, how I navigated the boundaries as I grew in my self acceptance, which is still always an ongoing process. Um, for me and for my clients, by the way, who are not disabled but struggle with language barriers,
Mm.
um, is that I have learned that it's up to me to hold my head up. So, for example, I used to work as a New York City public school teacher, and I was the only person with a physical disability on staff. And it was really, the beginning years were really great, but getting the job in the first place was crazy. The interview process was, well, I hope you don't mind, but these kids are going to say mean things to you. To which I'd reply, don't worry, I won't stand in the corner and cry. Which I guess my sarcasm is not always appreciated. But, and another way that I set a boundary was, okay, so number one, I had to learn to hold my head up and not react, instead respond.
Mm.
Hold your head up, be yourself, be friendly, smile, be welcoming, but not in an ingenuous way. Be open and understand that you may be the only person with a disability that this person has ever met at a professional level. But after they get to know you and they get to know the level of your expertise, then we're going to the next level. So the initial boundary is, listen, this is who I am, this is what I offer, and let me show you. That's
Mm.
how you establish that boundary. You don't react to, oh my God, they give me a dirty look or they made some snide comment or whatever. We can't do that. We have to treat them as though they are uninformed. And then after we inform them, we can then have a deeper discussion. And finally, the other part of setting boundaries is to accept the fact that um, you are affected by this bias. And as you say, you have the right to not always be the educator, for the community that doesn't understand you, never saw you, or doesn't know what to do with you. And, you do not have to always be the one that explains yourself. Sometimes you can just be by being in the room. Let them observe you,
Mhm.
let them come to you, let them ask you questions. It's okay to not always want to go into, oh, let me help you understand mode. That's another way of setting
Mhm.
boundaries that I found very effective.
Yeah, I love that. I appreciate that. And it speaks to so many other elements of human interaction, is like, let's have an opportunity to have an authentic connection and build on that with the intention of, I'm open to learning who this person is and learning more about them. I was wondering if as we're talking about accessible spaces and the feeling of belonging or not, have you had any experiences where an event or a setting environment was done so well accessibly that you felt seen and felt belonging in that space?
Mm-hmm. Hmm. I have to be very honest here. I I don't want to sound like a victim because I never think of myself as a victim, um, especially at this time in my life. But I can I can say from my own experience, the most accessibility and most uh, connection and inclusion that I've experienced has come from organizations that are aware. So, in the first place,
Mm.
so places like Nickel, the National Council on Independent Living would have a conference every year, and I would go to those conferences. And of course, there's all these accommodations, and it was fabulous because I also, as a person with a disability, would learn about the different things that other people, other professionals with disabilities were using to accommodate themselves. So, for example, my husband has low vision. Well, now he's blind, but he had low vision. And I came back from the conference saying, "You won't believe it. I was sitting at this table, and there was a blind person on one side of me and another person with low vision on another side of me. And they said, okay, it's time to take notes." And everybody's whipped out all their technology. And I'm sitting there, with my little pad and paper, and I was very impressed.
Mm.
So, to answer your question, I think that the potential for a deeper understanding of what accessibility looks like and what it means for everyone um, is always possible. But honestly, Jennifer, on a personal level, it's only been for me in organizations that are aware to begin with.
Mm.
Oh no, that's not positive.
No, I mean,
Yeah.
I am a keep it real person, and that's part of these conversations, is to shed light on some of these things that are not often placed as a priority, as designing a space or an event or something to be accessible. I'm even sitting here thinking like, ooh, I don't know if there are captions on this video. We're having this whole conversation about accessibility, and I can't find like how to activate captions. And so I'm feeling badly if this ends up not having captions on it. We'll see how it shows up on the other platforms.
Hmm.
um but it's something that it's so, I think, like you mentioned, there are so many different um ways that people can be disabled. There's apparent and non-apparent. um I think sometimes general society has like a fear of, well, how can I possibly know or anticipate what everybody from every single disabled identity could need? How do I anticipate that to make a
Right.
fully accessible space? I think sometimes employers have concerns about, well, I can't possibly, you know, um, calculate for every scenario. And what I one of the things that I work into my advocacy and training and consulting, that I hear a lot of other folks, is there there are some simple things that often don't cost any money
Right.
that can work across the board for many people,
Hmm.
right? So um my brain is drawing a blank at the moment, but what are some examples of that you've seen, that maybe there's one action that's taken, but that can
Hmm.
be helpful across many different disabilities and their access needs?
Well, for me, I'm all into language and communication, right? Yeah, as I mentioned, the whole idea of becoming an ESL educator and then a coach, it came out of the advocacy because I'm all about wanting to give people the skills to communicate effectively. So one simple accommodation are the closed captioning, and don't worry about it because we've shared all my I'm like so not tech, but I'm learning. So it's the closed captioning and it's also the translation. And you can offer closed captioning in other languages, even reminding your audience that that they can click on a certain part of their screen to access those captioning, that captioning process. For example, I have this audio event that I host every Friday called Laura Speaks. Plug, sorry.
Yeah, go
And
ahead.
okay, so anyway, and one of the participants privately messaged me and said I didn't understand everyone because of their accent, maybe my accent, maybe my listening. I couldn't understand. So I just made a point before opening the meeting completely to remind them that they can go click on the three little dots in the upper right hand corner and access the captioning. So things like this are so simple reminders of what people can do that don't cost any money. Um, Physical accommodations, yes, sure. It has to be a reasonable accommodation. So if they have to put a new elevator in like a historical building, that's going to be a fight. Okay, you can do it, you can win the right, you can get it done, but that's going to take time. However, if there was a back entrance to a building that was accessible, while it might be a pain in the neck, at least you can still get into the building, and it creates an entry point for you while they're working on more of a central entrance. Those are two examples I can think of that don't necessarily cost any money and are not a big to do to
Mhm.
implement.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, my mind goes back to curiosity that, if there are some steps that are taken, say if I go to an event and um, everyone is using the microphone. This is one of my pet peeves when there's a group event, people are like, I don't need the mic, I can speak loud enough. It's not for you, the speaker. It's for who is
Right.
listening. And not everyone can hear without the microphone, right? So it's things like people being mindful of that, people being mindful of providing slides and presentation information available for digital download. I find for myself, when there are some steps that are taken to show like, okay, they're trying, maybe they didn't get everything right. It it makes me more open to want to work with them and say like, I see that you're trying. Is it possible to maybe next time add this, or is it possible to have this available? Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I think that's another piece that often can get overlooked, like with employers and event organizers and space holders, that the small steps, even if they don't cover everything, can go a long way to making someone feel like, hey, they're thinking about me, they're thinking about us, uh,
Right.
and not just assuming everyone is able-bodied through and through. So that can go a long way. I think one of the things I advocate for with employers is, have a way that everybody across the board, everybody who's hired, can provide information about like what supports help them do their best work.
Right. Across the board, like you said, I love that. I love that. That's excellent. Yeah.
Yeah, so it doesn't single anyone out, or it doesn't make a person feel like, ooh, I have to be like the one to raise my,
Right. I'm
go
your
through the
token.
elimination
Yeah.
process.
Right.
but it can normalize. Everybody has support needs. Everybody. Like every workplace that I've ever gone to has this whole like, like, is your mouse ergonomic? Is your chair, the right? You're not supposed to tuck your legs under. You're supposed to do this or that, right? Like that's for everybody. And
Mm-hmm.
so if it's normalized that we all have things that help us do our jobs in the best way, how about everybody has a place to say that? And then if there is need on top of that, there's going to be more of a culture of acceptance of that. When there is recognition, there's things that everybody needs to feel supported, to be able to do their best.
Exactly. And, that brings us to this discussion of the diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's so popular now. And of course, I support it. It's part of our lives as people that are considered other. But when we talk about diversity and wanting to increase it in the workforce, what are we really saying? We're saying we want a variety of people with different perspectives from different places in the world, with different physical and or mental and or different challenges or disabilities, whether they are apparent or not, to feel welcome and then included, because we value the difference in their perspectives. It's like valuable I'm working internationally now, so it's really valuable for me to learn that not everybody appreciates a blunt New Yorker. Like the people in London are like, hey, why don't you calm down a bit? You're a little too much, or whatever. That it adds to our perspective. And we as the professionals, especially you, especially me, especially a lot, I guess, of all of us, I get so passionate I lose my train of thought. Here's what I want to say. We're here to sort of, again, give people permission to be themselves in ways that's not brain surgery. I think that's why I originally connected with you, because you had presented this idea of creating a form where every employee who's being onboarded can fill it out, and it can be a private thing. It doesn't have to be a public announcement. And it can be part of their accommodation process. And I thought, wow, Jennifer, I never heard anybody take such a great idea and just make it really simple, understandable, and accessible for everyone. Because why don't people report? They don't report because they're afraid of the stigma.
Mm-hmm.
People are going to say mean things to you. I'm worried about your competence. What if you get hurt? I can't possibly accommodate everyone. No,
Mm-hmm.
you don't have to worry about that if you have a universal intake form. Anyway, talking way too much. Sorry.
No,
But
we're
I
here to
commend you.
talk. I love your passion, and it is so important. Um I think about neurodivergent affirming space as like culture. I think about disability justice as culture. And, there's so many trainings that we attend on like cultural competency and being aware, and it's easy when people are thinking about cultural competency around different races and ethnicities or around different religions. But I think that we are not as a society caught up to yet. Disability identity is there is a culture that we have that we
Right,
share.
right,
Neurodivergence has a culture that we share. There's
right.
ways of interacting and being, and so it's not a matter of doing it wrong. It's a matter of this is a different way that people are in the world and engage with the world and engage with each other.
Mhm.
I think about like a lot of people talk about how many autistic people have difficulty making eye contact. Um, if we're making assumptions, then that's pretty limiting. If a person is experiencing having a conversation with someone who doesn't make eye contact, they might make an assumption like, ooh, this person is shifty, they won't look me in the eye, so they're being dishonest, they're being shady. um you know any number of like derogatory negative assumptions, whereas maybe they're autistic. Maybe they come from a culture where eye contact is seen as disrespectful, and so they are practicing their cultural norms of not making direct eye contact. um so I'm curious about like what would happen socially
Okay. Right.
if if we navigated some of these issues as matters of intercultural interaction, or
Mhm.
having cultural humility around disability culture, or cultural humility around neurodivergent culture.
Right.
That in my brain, I'm like, that would be such a fun experiment if society were on board with that.
I know, I know. I'm like, wow, I'm thinking the same thing. Wow, that would be so cool. I'd love to head that workshop up. I'd love to be right in there. That's exactly how I agree. I agree. I mean, I just want to really recognize what you're saying here. This eye contact idea, the body language idea, it's interesting on two fronts. First of all, three fronts. Okay, three fronts. My brain's racing. Okay. Number one, we agree that disability is diverse within itself. So there's all kinds of levels, there's all kinds of types, there's all kinds of ways that people are impacted, and our club door is always open, and it's like there's a rolling admission, a process, which is not necessarily negative, but just a fact of life. Number two, the idea of body language, right? When you have a disability, you don't have as much control over how your body is
Yeah.
perceived by the people that you're speaking with. And so that can also impact your level of confidence. And
Mm.
then the third thing is the eye contact thing. So now switching over to the English as a second language communication coach, it's interesting how there's overlap there, because as a person with cerebral palsy, I'm fairly cross-eyed. So my students would sometimes say to me, well, who are you looking at? Who are you looking
Mm.
at? And I said, I don't know. I think I'm looking at you. And they'd say, no, you're looking over there, or you're looking over there. And it impacted my authority in certain
Mm.
cases. Um, so I would just look down, kind of relax my eyes, and look back up and get back to work. But
Mm.
from a language point of view and from a cultural point of view, we do have to understand that communication coupled with body language is determined by the culture that you come from. So many Asian cultures do find that it's highly disrespectful to look someone directly in the face.
Mm.
There's also, distance. Some
Mm.
people will come right up to you and start talking, and that can be very intimidating if you do not know that culture, and or if you have some sort of disability that's included, uh, that gets triggered with lack of physical space.
Mm.
So we have to be aware of all that. And again, how do you get started in those conversations? I think that if we bring this information as consultants to the organizations, and we say, listen, we're willing to talk with you, we're willing to not just do a standard workshop, but to give you real life examples that your staff will feel.
Mm.
'Cause if they could feel it, they'll understand it.
Yeah,
uh, yeah.
absolutely.
Hmm.
And I think and yeah, my brain is swirling with a bunch of thoughts. So one of the things that is on my mind is that oftentimes I will see or hear of some employer manager person being like, well, we don't have any disabled people at our office. False. They're already there. They are working to mask those things, or overcompensate because of the fear of discrimination, the fear of being passed over for promotions,
Mm-hmm.
those kinds of things. So, one, assume that in any room, any space that you're in with other human beings, there are disabled and neurodivergent people present.
Right.
Um, the other piece is what is the other piece that I was thinking about? Oh, my brain lost it. Um, it was something that you said that made me think about it. I don't know. Maybe it will come back to my brain. These are things that
That
happen.
that that it's okay. That it happens to me all the time. The idea that we were moving our conversation into this area of diversity and
Mm,
inclusion, and I think we were discussing this idea of inclusion starts with recognition of of the cultural differences that exist between us and the lack of awareness.
mm,
So, and that lack of awareness means, first of all, as you say, acknowledging that there are people already in your organizations that have disabilities. They may not be, I'm losing the word, but they're not, and you'll correct me and forgive me, community, that they're not obvious. It's not like, if I hobble into a room, they're like, well, obviously she has trouble walking, but there's other invisible disabilities. That's what I was looking for. There are
mhm,
people with invisible disabilities. There are people with all levels of disability that are already in your organization, and it's imperative that we bring them forward, and not as a shining example of inspiration, because we talked about how that both makes us kind of a little bit sick,
mm,
but as a way of establishing that it is normal.
mm,
Does
mhm.
that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Um, yeah, and my brain came back online to to remember what I was going to say about um, one of the steps that people can take if they want to be expanding their understanding about disability culture, about neurodivergent culture, is very simply follow disabled people on social media. Um, I I don't have a list of links at the moment. I can put them up with this recording, but that
Mm-hmm.
is an excellent way, and diversify, right? Like, you know, if I heard somebody talk the other day, they're a deaf keynote speaker, and they were saying, I'm like so involved in my deaf community, sometimes I forget to connect with people from um, different pockets of the disabled community, because when I have a diverse array of connections or friendships, then I'm able to learn different things about what like the different needs that people have, or the different challenges that they face. So that's one way, very simply, that people can expose themselves to what to the lived experience. And I'm also going to say I'm a huge advocate for the whole nothing about us without us. So if you are looking for educators or speakers, or
Mm-hmm.
people to provide information and learning about disabilities, find someone with lived experience and pay them, compensate them well for that job, right? Like, I am not deaf. And while I do work in the accessibility arena, it would not
Mm-hmm.
be appropriate for me to be hired or to accept a job to teach people about deaf culture and deaf community, because I don't
Right.
have lived experience there.
Right.
So, yeah, those were just a couple of final thoughts as we wrap up in the next minute or so. um uh yeah, what kind of so I want to ask two things. What,
Okay.
if you have any like kind of closing thoughts that you want to make sure, if you kind of if people don't hear anything other than this is the thing you want them to take home. And then the second thing is, how can people connect with you if they're interested in working with you, or yeah.
Thank you so much. Okay, so the thing I want people to take away with them to remember about this wonderful conversation is that it was our invitation to the audience to realize that no matter what your profession is, your difference is. In this case, we focused on disability because we are members of the disability community, and there's a lot of richness there and value there for us. And we want to encourage all of our brothers and sisters to be just as brave and out there and living. I want you to walk away with that feeling of confidence and knowing that your difference is not a limitation, that your difference is just that. It's just a difference. Yes, you need accommodations. It does not mean you have to over explain yourself, and it does not mean that your expertise in your profession is lessened because you have a physical disability. The second part is if you are a professional who speaks English as a second language, speaking of being more than just a person with a disability who's a professional, I always wanted to break out of the mold. Like I said, I'm proud to be disabled, very proud, as we discussed. But we're not all just one thing. And so, if you are a professional who speaks English as a second language and you'd like to have a private consultation about your insecurities, whether it's your accent, your pacing, your implicit bias experiences, your denials for promotion, your denial of accommodation, like translation, and how I can help you through my online program, reach out to me on LinkedIn. There is no other Laura Vann LaRusso. So finally, you can reach out to me at Gmail, which is LVLWRITES, LVLWrites@gmail.com. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. And I'll make sure to post links with this recording. This live will live on in posterity. So if you're not able to join us live, you can rewatch it, share it with friends, and stay tuned. We will be back again next Thursday with more conversation. So thank you so much. Thank you, Laura. This has been a great conversation.
Thank you so much.
Till next